Okay, and so we said that with the notion of the speech community, the individuals share not only linguistic competence, but also communicative competence. So they have knowledge of the norms of interpretation as well as the norms of interaction. And of course, we looked at the fact that members of the speech community, they should be interacting regularly with each other, and and they should be sharing the norms of communication, right? But then, do they really need to be sharing the same area of residence? Because the speech community implies or suggests that these individuals are living within the same area. So the question was, do you have to be one in Jamaica or within that particular country to be considered a member of the speech community, right? And can you be a member of the speech community and you've never physically entered the community? And we have to consider these definitions with the, the whole internet, the global village. We have to consider those definitions with those technologies in mind, right? So we we are drifting away from, especially with the pandemic, we're drifting away from the notion that you have to be in a particular locale to interact with the people there, right? I've been doing several conferences. Well, before COVID, I've been doing conferences online, and the participants are all over the world, right? But even more now than before. So if I'm interacting more with those individuals, then can I become a member of their speech community, right? So we found problems with the notion of the speech community. And so I introduced the community of practice. So with the community of practice now, it basically criticizes the notion of the speech community, which basically, as I said, implies that you have to be in the same area. And they say, furthermore, in most urban areas, people don't even talk to their neighbors, they don't even interact with their neighbors, they don't even know what their neighbors look like, they don't even know their neighbor's name, right? And so it can't be then that the concept of the speech community is effective in explaining the variation in our speech. It must be something else. And so Penelope Eckert and her researchers, fellow researchers, they came up with the concept of the community of practice. And the community of practice is a group of individuals coming together around some common task or activity, right? So they're coming together around some common goal, and they're all working together to achieve that goal. So whether it's your profession, let's say you're a teacher or a doctor, or you are a musician, and so you have to, rehearse with the band members regularly, right? And so you're spending more of your waking hours, your active hours with this group. Let's say you're a member of a football club, right? You're practicing more with those individuals. You're rehearsing more with the choir members and so on, right? And so the notion of the community of practice says that our speech is really influenced by those that we interact with more within that activity space, right? So whatever the activity is, whether it be football, whether it be teaching, right? Whether it be that you're a vendor, right? Whatever that activity is, that is what is influencing the variety in your speech, right? So we have the concept of the speech community and the concept of the community of practice, all right? And we're going to look now at DJ Gentleman that I mentioned, and some of you said that, you're familiar with him. So I'm going to play a little clip, and I want you to tell me in terms of community of practice and the speech community, which one you think is applicable here. So remember, we said that he's from Germany, right? And the caption says that this is first time on camera in Jamaica, 1994. So let's listen. All right. So let me know if you're hearing clearly.
Anytime you're ready, moving at your city, check out your local sound and go and pretty. Going at the dance and them enough chatty. Moving up the line and we never go and silly. So when the sunlight go down and the moon shine out bright, time for all no people to get hypnotized. No words we left, no words we criticize. Sweet reggae, I sing, oh you know what? Say we are living in a world full of temptation. It seems crazy if you set up your future plan. You know, gentlemen, that a conscious youth me.
Kurz nach.
Okay, so you guys can let me know. What do you think? Do you think it's as a result of the community of practice or more the speech community?
Miss, can I ask a question? It's regarding to this. Miss?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so he's from Germany, and I believe there might be, how do I put it now? A Jamaican community with actual Jamaicans living there. So it wouldn't really, I don't know. I don't think that is that.
You have to get facts to you have to get the facts to argue that. Jamaicans are everywhere, so
I know.
you can't
So
say that for all cases.
Right, and it's just like how they would say in America you have little China. I'm thinking you might have a little Jamaica, and he's a part of it. So I wouldn't really call it a practice or it's a community of practice. I would think he's actually.
You have to give me the evidence for that community that you're talking about. So we can't base your contribution on you think. Go and find it and bring it back and come share it with us.
Okay.
I understand where you're going. You understand? But we need the evidence of that.
Okay. But along that line, I was thinking based on how he sounds, that is not just persons out there who like the music or the culture. I think maybe he actually had the community outside of the country, but the community.
What community though? What community? So
not the one of
that he lives in a community, but it may not be that he lives in a community, but that he wants. So he's a DJ.
Yes.
And we have lots of other DJs that go to Germany. So I think that they are one of the biggest, what would you say now, consumers of dancehall and reggae music outside of Jamaica and
More than
Japan.
Japan, cause and Japan.
Right.
Okay.
So, which community do you think you'd be a part of?
I don't know why I don't think it is practice, but I see where practice would be a part. But I just have a feeling he's more in an actual Jamaican community settings with actual Jamaicans. But yes, he might have him other white friends who do have the practice, and of course, them sit amongst themselves and mimic the
So why do you
actual.
think he has to be living with Jamaicans to sound that way?
Um, I could be wrong, but I'm going to give you an example of someone you know. For instance, one of my friends who did very well in Chinese and spoke Chinese fluently in Jamaica, but when she got there, it was a difference, and even her language started to sound different once she was around them. Even that they keep wondering how she sound more Chinese than even some Chinese. So I think the community itself being there or being with them did a difference than just learning it. And I have a feeling that's why his accent and pronunciation and everything was so good.
Anyone else? Community of practice or speech community?
Miss, may I say something?
Yeah, just project a little bit more so we can hear you clearly, please.
Hearing me now, Miss?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I think it's through practice. So it would be community of practice.
Okay, want to give us your reasons?
Miss, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
No, I'm saying if you want to give us your reasons for that.
Because although I agree with Janice to an extent that the community within which he lives may have Jamaicans residing there, but in truth and in fact, he must have gone through some practice for him to be able to DJ like that, because I didn't know he wasn't Jamaican when I heard him. He sounds just like one of the other DJs or local DJs here. So I don't think he could have just heard the Jamaicans or hear them speaking rather and picked it up so well. The accent, the sound, the quote unquote riding of the rhythm. I think he practiced. I think he practiced.
Okay. Let me hear the rest of you. Community of practice or speech community?
Good evening. I would say community of practice. Because he, as a singer, DJ, or whatever, he wants to relate to the culture or to the people that he is entertaining. And so, he's going to practice then, quote unquote, the language of the community. So that's basically my understanding of that.
Anyone else thinking like Janice? everybody else is thinking community of practice. All right, so he would have interacted with, and if you read his bio, he would have interacted with lots of Jamaican entertainers. In fact, there was an interview while I was looking for this clip. There was an interview with Richie Stevens, and just them talking about collaborating, etc. And so, he has worked with the Marleys, Marley, and so on. So he is well respected within the genre by the other entertainers. All right. And yes, he would have acquired the language, he fell in love with the genre, dancehall music and the Jamaican culture. And so, when we saw him there, he was basically in this video, as it says, his first time on camera in Jamaica. He would have been traveling back and forth, but not living here. So he was familiar with, the Jamaican scene, etc. But he would have developed or acquired Jamaican Creole before coming to Jamaica. What I really wanted to show you guys was the interview that he did with ER, with Anthony Miller, right? That kind of explains it a little bit more in terms of how he developed the language. And remember too, there is a historical connection between Germany and Jamaica, right? So it would definitely be a community of practice. Okay, so even if he visited, we have lots of visitors, repeat visitors who come to the island all the time. They don't live here, but they come and they visit and they go home. They don't acquire the language, they don't know the language, right? They probably pick up one and two things, but he has native like competence, right? I remember we spoke about linguistic competence and communicative competence. He has a native like competence of Jamaican Creole. So it's a little bit more than just being in the community, but also practicing using the language to express himself. And in the interviews, he actually sounds like Sean Paul. So he kind of sounds like Sean Paul. So even in speech, he sounds like a Jamaican, or you might say him sound like a uptown Jamaican then, if him sound like Sean Paul. But yeah, he sounds a bit like him, in speech, right? So this is just showing us that we do have gray areas when we talk about the speech community and the community of practice, but we should remember the concept behind both of them. And when we are writing our papers or using of the terms, we should consider the situation, right? And what is applicable, what is ideal, what is suitable based on let's say a case by case basis, right? So that was just a little example for you to hear. For those of you, first of all, who were not familiar with him, to hear his approximation of the Jamaican Creole. And we can definitely say that it sounds, it can pass. Let's put it that way, right? It can pass. So we spoke about language variation. Right, so we spoke about language variation and we said that it is a hallmark of social linguistics. And remember I said in our previous sessions that Del Hines, he really put forward the notion that we need to be studying language in its social context, right? So while they were dealing with linguistic competence and speaker competence, Delheim says, well, we also need to look at communicative competence, right? We need to include the social aspect of language in our study, right? And so we have what we call sociolinguistics, and you should remember that that is a micro approach, and that the sociology of language is a macro approach. All right. And we talk about internal variation, which looks at the different ways of expressing the same meaning within a language or within an individual's speech. All right. So you have, for instance, we talk about cars, we said vehicles, we said ride, whip, wheels, etc., walking versus walking, and so on. And then, we look at the pronunciation of particular words. We talk about education, schedule versus schedule, economy versus economy, and so on. Before I show the clip, right, let me stop there and just go to the clip. All right, so this is going to show us a bit of variation between British and American English. So pay attention, and I want each person to tell me one thing that they learned from the video. All right, so let's go.
Logical, lexical, or even syntactical, and generally also grammar. The boundary between original variety and so here we have a difference between British versus American English in terms of three main differences. The first difference is in terms of pronunciation. For example, British says car, but American says a car, and so on and so forth, as a lot of words such as home, class, stop, etc. The second difference is in terms of vocabulary. That is to say, British and American people refers to the same thing, the same meaning in different items or words. For example, British English people says pavement. The American people says sidewalk. British people says autumn. The American says fall. The British says flat. The American says apartment. The British says lift. The American says elevator. Good. The third difference is in terms of grammar. For example, a British says, have you got a pen? American says, do you have a pen? The British says, she has got used to that. American says, she has gotten used to that. British says, he dived into the sea. American says, he dove into the sea. British says, have you eaten? American says, did you eat? Good. Social varieties. Each social variety reflects the speech of a given social class. Social varieties involve characteristic differences in pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. Socio-economic factors play a crucial role since the variety one speaker reveals one's social class. Social variation. A standard English versus non-standard English. Linguistic forms which are not part of standard English are by definition non-standard English. Socially speaking, because non-standard forms are associated with the speech of less prestigious social groups, the label non-standard acquired as a negative to non-standard forms. varies according to the speaker's social class. Class meaning the speaker's social prestige, status, or respect within community belong to. So, the speaker's socioeconomic level will affect. The lower the socioeconomic level is, the more regional variation there is. The higher the level is, the less regional variation we have. Good. Social class. Vocabulary as a social marker. In the 1950th century, in England, many pairs of words were to identify the social group the speaker belongs to. The word either placed the speaker in the upper class speakers or the non-upper class speakers. Example, upper class speaker says sitting room, while non-upper class speaker says lounge. Upper class speaker says lavatory, while non-upper class speaker says toilet. Upper class speaker says sofa, while the non-upper class speaker says settee. Good. Social class, grammar as a social marker. In English-speaking communities, it was found that children from lower class families used more vernacular verb forms than children from middle class families. Example, in the past tense, a higher class says, I finished that book yesterday. Lower class says, I finished that book yesterday. In the present tense, for example, the higher class says, Michelle walks to school every day. Lower class says, Michelle walks to school every day. 6. Varieties. A speaker's language also reflects whether that speaker
Alright, I don't want to go too far. Alright? But notice that he was talking about regional variation in the initial clip, right? And he was talking about the differences between standard American English and British English. Do you guys manage to observe anything?
Ms. Walters,
Yes.
I don't know if I'm the only one hearing, but you are coming over with an echo.
Let me check my mic. Are you still hearing it?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a yes.
Okay.
We can hear you clearly still though, you know, but
Are you hearing me now?
almost the
Clearly?
trill. Yes, we hear you. We could have heard you. We were hearing you clearly, but it's just that you're coming over with a trill.
Right. So are you hearing the echo still?
Yes, miss.
Hold on a minute. There's an echo feature on the mic. So let me just make sure that it is. Hold on. All right. Let me know now. Is it better now?
Oh, the same. But if it's not going to be corrected, just go ahead, because we can hear you still. It's just that it has the trill.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, so this is the echo feature. I turned it off. All right. Let's see if that's better. Right, so the regional variations, remember we said that Standard American English, SAE, is a variety of British English. However, you have variation, right? Even in terms of the vocabulary and the phonology, as well as the syntax. So you know, in at my church, they have been discussing the fundraising activities for constructing a lift. And so they've been using lift, right, all this time. And so someone made the point that, well, they're not even sure if lift is the correct term, right? More people would know it as elevator. However, if we're talking about correctness and the fact that we subscribe to British English, right? So when you are submitting your assignments and you're doing a spell check, you have to ensure that you have used British English. So in fact, lift would be the correct term in that sense. However, more Jamaicans are familiar with the American term of the elevator. All right. So sometimes people get confused because they are not sure what is the equivalent of the lexical item in the other variety of English. Right. So let me know what it is that you learned from or anything that you discovered from the video when he spoke about the differences between right, here you go. The differences between British English and American English. So are you doing these all along?
Uh, most of them,
Mhm.
most of them, I never quite got that American used dove.
Right.
I never knew that one at all. Never knew that they would say he dove into the sea. Maybe if you lose books like maybe like Voyages and so you would find that out.
Right. And it's a little bit confusing for people, you know, especially
Yes, but when they're teaching it, yeah, and with irregular verbs and all of that, and it becomes a
right.
little confusing based on people's experience. And
Right.
some literature will tell you that it's not correct.
And the thing about it, why it's also confusing, is because we are not consuming British entertainment as much as we are consuming American entertainment and media, right? So we are more exposed to standard American English
Yes,
than to
true.
British English, right? So the shows that we're watching, even the channels that we have, you know, if we say we have cable, you know, Netflix,
Yes,
etc.,
true.
you have mostly American. You have to be selective, you know, if you're gonna consume British, what would I say, you know, British entertainment, right? So
Yep.
it poses a bit of a challenge for people learning English because they're
Mm.
consuming one type of English, but then they're told that this is the quote unquote correct way, right? But this is an example of regional variation where it's the same language, English, with two different dialects or varieties of English. And of course, you know, some of the changes in pronunciation and even the vocabulary, some of these changes we can attribute some of these changes to political ideology, right? And wanting to have their own unique English language. All right. So moving from lift to elevator, from flat to apartment, you know, I mean, you can't even see a connection between the words. They're like totally different words, right? So this would have been more of a political statement, an ideological statement, a statement of identity, as well. All right.
Yes, miss.
She has got used to that. British says he dove into the sea. Did you eat?
Right, and then we moved on to look at regional variation, and we had said that this has to do with the marking of residents, right, from one region, right? So you're marking them off based on region, and we talk about regional dialects, right? So when you hear an individual speaking, let's say speaking Creole from the West, you know that they're from the West, or even speaking English, right? You can hear the peculiar features that would allow you to know that, okay, they are from this area. Likewise, if they're from Kingston, if they're from Clarendon, etc., you will hear differences in their speech. And sometimes we say that it ought to be mutually intelligible, but sometimes we have Creole speakers that not everyone would readily understand. So we take it for granted that, man, all of we talk about so naturally we're gonna understand each other. That's not always the case, right? I don't know if I share the experience that I had. When I went to visit my aunt in Brooklyn for the summer, you go away for the summer holidays every summer. And so there was a young man who he was fresh from Jamaica. But my American cousins, they couldn't understand what he was saying. So they called me now and said, I need to translate what he's saying. And, he said that he was from Manchester. That was the only thing I understood. The only thing I understood, and I would have been a teen, and he was about 10. And, he said, I come from Manchester, and then I understand nothing else he said. And he was using patois, right? So sometimes we take it for granted that, yes, it's mutually intelligible, but if you have differences in the phonology, for instance, it's gonna pose a challenge to understand clearly what the individual is saying, right? I could figure out some of the words, but the syntax was definitely different from the syntax that I know in my pattern, right? Likewise, the vocabulary. So I'm not sure which part of, I would really love to hear him now, but I'm not sure which part of Manchester he was from, but I couldn't understand it at all. And I was shocked, and my cousins were shocked because they were saying, "But you're Jamaican and you live in Jamaica. How is it that, pick up, how is it that you can't understand, right? How is it that you can't understand what he's saying?" But I really couldn't understand. And so, in that regard, with the test of mutual intelligibility, do we then have different, let me say, different patois languages in Jamaica? Because remember the test of mutual intelligibility that I spoke about some time ago, I said that even though the individuals may be speaking different dialects, they should be able to understand each other. When they can't understand each other, it means that they're speaking two different languages. So that is the test that we use to test for dialects and to test for languages. And remember, our definition of a dialect is simply a variety of a language, right? So if it is that I could understand it, and none of the other Jamaicans could understand what you were saying, could it be that we have different patois languages existing within Jamaica? Because we've always been saying that we have different regional dialects of patois, which means that they are mutually intelligible, right? But here, if most of us in the neighborhood at the time in Brooklyn, we were not able to understand that young man, then could it be that he's speaking a different patois, right? Altogether. So that is something, again, for those of you interested in doing further research, that is something that you can explore, all right? Because we just take it for granted that all the regional dialects are mutually intelligible. So if you come from Kingston, you can understand somebody from St. Elizabeth, you can understand somebody from Mobile, the Mobile person can understand somebody from Clarendon, etc., etc. That's what we say, that these are regional dialects, right? However, there could be some evidence that we have different patois languages in Jamaica. So I want to know if any of you, have had similar experiences. Anybody? Speaking to another
No, Miss.
that you can't understand nothing at all.
All right. Miss, there was a little girl that was staying with me during COVID. Well, not with me, with my neighbors for COVID. And she is from Clarendon, to be specific, Moko. And when she came up, we understand everything, but it is really hard and she spoke fast. So 90% of the time you have to ask her for repeat. But you could understand, even if she used certain words like, well, I could be wrong, but let's just for an example say bingo. We could understand the context. It's just that she spoke. It really was basalectal, but we could understand.
So the easier for you then was really the phonology. And
Yes, not the word choices per se. Yes, just how she actually called certain words and the speed at which she spoke. And yeah.
Okay. Right. And I remember asking the young man to take time and talk. And I really take time. They couldn't understand it. And it's not that he developed some kind of hybrid language. Let's say a mixture between the Ebonics and the Jamaican people, because he just arrived like the week before. Right? Anyone else? Any similar situation?
Kind of it's the same incident. Well, incidentally, it's with parish of Clarendon as well. Some of the time when they speak, for example, the word Sumari is translated to meaning somebody or someone. There was an incident.
Sumari or Sumari? Yes, repeat it.
Sumari.
Sumari
Because
like
Sumari.
a R-I? Okay.
Like Sumari,
Right
I go
here.
tell Sumari, cause Sumari soon come. I go ask Sumari if, and I was like, the context immediately confused. Yes.
Any
Yes,
Caledonians on here?
I was born at the Lanyon Town Hospital. I've never heard
Yes,
Clarendon.
Miss Clarendon here.
I've never heard them speaking like that at all.
I've never heard it either.
Okay. I have experience with St. Elizabeth in that sometimes I cannot understand what they're saying when they ask, I think Montagonians say where you bend they go, and they say where you when they go, and they say when you ask them a question, they say yes, no man, or words to that effect. They have some St. Elizabeth, they had some funny words to say. But I'm from Clarendon, and my husband is from another section in Clarendon. I've never heard that dialect that the others are referring to at all.
Interesting.
Mark you, I came to Kingston early.
Okay. All right, so that is something that we can actually study, the dialects within the parishes as well, right? So for each parish, you have an urban and a rural area. So you have country and you have town in every parish, correct? And so, it could be that there is a variation within those two regions as well, right? Because you always hear people that talk about Moko. From a little bit till now, people talk about Moko and they talk about the speech of people from Moko, right? So again, if you're thinking of, a research area, a research topic, that is an interesting one, and it would be centered around regional variation, and of course, you would have to apply phonology, morphology, um, and syntax, right, to that study. Okay. And we spoke about the machete, we spoke about the various names, and some of you were able to identify with some of them, and you shared with members of your household, and they were able to say yes, I know this one, I know that one, it's based on the shape, and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna be adding you guys to the Google group with the articles, because I want you guys to read this one, so you can see the map and you can see where each of these different terms were used. All right, so there is a dialectal map that the camp created, and I want you guys to look at that. And then we moved on to talk about social variation, and we said that is variation according to the social class or grouping of the individuals. And we're going to be looking a little bit more at that. We said that, of course, that's the focus of the course. So we'll be looking more at social variation, right? Creating words. So we spoke about the linguistic variables, and we said that the linguistic variable is any linguistic item that has the same underlying form, but it has different surface forms, right? And these surface forms, they are called variants. So we talk about variants of a variable. With the different aspects of language, we have the phonological variants, we have the syntactic variants, and so on, right? So we spoke about the word economy, some people say economy, and so on, but we weren't necessarily getting any social information based on the pronunciations, right? And we looked at the variable go away, with the variants leave, went, one, galang, and so on, right? Ranging from English to Jamaican. And these would be phonological variables, so the ringing versus the ringing, and the wit versus with, for instance, or wit. And the lexical variables, and of course, we spoke about the cat versus cat and so on. All right, so let us move on. And yes, we spoke about the syntactic variables as well. And this is what makes language interesting. So I mentioned William Labov, some people say Labov, and that he is really the founding father of sociolinguistics. And so we're going to hear a little bit more. I want you to listen particularly to the studies because we're going to be reading quite a bit of his studies. So let us pay attention here.
The science of spoken language, linguistics, with mathematical methods like no one before him. He was able to. Spoken language is the most important form of human communication. And William Labov transformed the science of spoken language, linguistics, with mathematical methods like no one before him. He was able to dissect languages and dialects in ways that taught us how we speak, how that speech changes over time, and often the cultural reasons why. His fascination with language began as a child.
One of the earliest films I saw as a kid was the black and white version of Pygmalion. There was a young woman who was saying, out, and get out, and he was writing it down, and I said, gee, how was he able to write down the sounds that person was making?
But he did not begin his career as a linguist. He studied English and philosophy at Harvard and took some science courses for fun. In 1959, after he graduated, those science courses got him a job as an industrial chemist. 10 years later, he decided to use his quantitative skills in a new way by switching careers.
I heard about this field called linguistics, and it occurred to me that this would be a great field to enter and try to give it a solider empirical base. Today we measure things not only with what we hear, but what we can see, translating sounds into numbers.
He went to Columbia, graduating with a PhD in linguistics in 1964. He stayed on as faculty until he moved to the University of Pennsylvania in 1971, where he continues to do research. Labov pioneered the field of sociolinguistics, looking for patterns in how the mind creates language, places it in social context and communities, and passes it along over time. He invented new techniques for fieldwork and mathematical analysis of voice recordings. He analyzed and classified waveforms associated with vowels and consonants used by people living in different places.
If you can understand what a person is saying, our computers can pretty well understand what the numbers that correspond to that are.
As instruments became faster and more accurate, he found something surprising.
When we started recording people speaking as close to their everyday speech as possible, we found that they don't always say the same thing. There's a great deal of variation. And that has become this almost a field called the study of change and variation.
People listen to speech for clues to social class, status, and cultural identity. For example, educators wanted to know why poor African American children had a hard time learning to read. Did it have anything to do with their dialect? His work contributed to the modern understanding of how all languages and dialects develop and vary. Labov proved that African American vernacular English is its own language, just as systematic and richly expressive as any other language.
Decade after decade, the residential segregation has increased, and that's responsible for the fact that this particular dialect is moving further and further away from other dialects.
Labov discovered
language change is not the result of inattention, laziness, carelessness, stupidity.
Language changes spontaneously in response to speech we encounter in the social fabric of our lives. Labov used his linguistic insights to develop a culturally sensitive program that helped improve the reading skills of millions of students. His findings had a profound effect on education and attitudes. As he studied more and more shifts in local speech patterns, he realized that dialects can develop rapidly. He embarked on an ambitious project, the Atlas of North American English. He found
there were huge changes taking place that affected millions of people at the same time, so that what we originally thought of as local identity becomes more mysterious. American dialects are becoming more different from each other. People say impossible. We're all watching the same television programs. How can it be? This is against common sense. The one thing we found is that people are not influenced by passive interaction.
People talk to other people who influence what they say and how they say it to each other.
That personal interaction doesn't exist with a television set.
Leboeuf's thousands of recordings offer us a time machine to study how rapidly our most basic form of communication, our spoken word, evolves.
The greatest thrill that we get in our work is to discover that through use of scientific methods you can reach out into the world and lay your hand on something that you feel that's real, that's really there.
William Leboeuf was awarded the 2013 Benjamin Franklin Medal in Computer and Cognitive Science. With mathematical methods.
All right. So we heard a little bit about Leboeuf. We call him Leboeuf, right? And his contribution to the field of social linguistics. And we've been looking at some of his variation studies. And I mentioned one last week, which we will be looking at further when we continue our focus on social variation. All right, so he basically quantified the social linguistics, all right, the different approaches, and of course, you know, he brought his mathematical methods to linguistics, right? Well, I know that many of you, or most of you probably don't want to hear that, but that's a big feature in variation, right? Especially looking at statistics, level of significance as it relates to variables, quantifying variables, and so on. All right, so you will see a little bit more as we continue in the course. And of course, he came up with the concept of the linguistic variable. Remember last week we spoke about, or Sunday we spoke about the indicator, the marker, and the stereotype. And we said that the indicator is a linguistic variable to which little or no social meaning is attached. All right, so no one really studies that because we're not really getting lots of information. Right, so when you think of schedule versus schedule, economy versus economy, education versus education, you're not really getting any social information. So we don't really study indicators, right? They indicate that there is some kind of difference in pronunciation, but or whatever the other category is within the syntax, but there is no social information that we're getting. All right. And then we looked at the marker and said that the marker has potent social information. So when we hear the marker, we can identify certain attributes of the speaker, right? Including where they're from, their age, the gender, etc. All right, level of education, and so on. And so, right, I spoke about Leboeuf's RLS study in New York, where he asked about the fourth floor, and individuals would respond with a very casual pronunciation initially, and then a very careful one on the second floor, right? And so what was happening was that he was able to link the level of rhoticity with social class. So the RLS variety, right? He found that that was synonymous with the lower class speech, and he determined the class based on the shoppers at particular department stores, right? So remember we spoke about Macy's and Saks and let's say Bobby's, for those of you familiar with there. And you know, because the items are cheaper, you know, they're selling stuff, generic stuff, you know, from Bobby's, for instance, the speech right, would be linked to those of the lower class because he's associating the products and services offered with spending power, right? So the higher the spending power that you have, then the more erotic your variety would be. So those shopping in Saks were very erotic. Those in Macy's were erotic as well, and then those in the lower class stores, so to speak, they did not use much eroticity in their speech. All right, move on. And then we spoke about the stereotypes and the fact that a stereotype doesn't have to be true. It just needs to be a popular notion. It just needs to be a popular belief, right? Or a popular characterization of the speech of a particular group of individuals, right? So that group could be groups according to professions, groups according to location, groups according to social class, and so on, right? And then we make assumptions based on how they are portrayed in the media. And we had a discussion about those trying to portray the Jamaican accent, right? And usually in movies, when they're trying to represent people from the islands, as they call it, it's always a Jamaican that they're trying to represent, right? Or let me say, it's usually a Jamaican. So you don't hear in popular movies people trying to portray a Trinidadian or a Asian, etc. But you will hear them sounding any kind of way, and that character is supposed to be Jamaican. All right, so we're going to look now at the extra linguistic variables. So there are three major types. We have speaker variables, the group variables, and situation variables. So let us look at the speaker variables. So of course, we have speaker variables being age. So remember, we just looked at linguistic variables. Other linguistic variables, markers, indicators, and stereotypes. Now we're looking at speaker variables. So we have age. We spoke a bit about age even from the first session, that the younger people, they would tend to have access to movies and music that would influence their speech. So usually when you think of slang, you think of something coming from a movie or something coming from a song, right? So the whole notion, for instance, bro God, the term is coming from a song, or the word is coming from a song, right? So older folks would not know what that means. They don't know who is a bro God. If you ask them who is a bro God, they're going to tell you the Prime Minister, right? But for those of you who know, it's actually coming from a song, right? So the younger people, they would tend to use more of the slang phrases, dancehall phrases, and words and so on. And that is very much a part of their vocabulary, right? But the younger folk, they would not necessarily understand readily, what some of these terms mean. Likewise, the younger folk can be using terms that the young people don't understand as well. For instance, if we were to do a survey and we said pickle, we're going to ask about 20 young people if they know what pickle means. I'm sure most of them won't, right? They won't be able to tell you what pickle means, right? Then we looked at gender. So with gender, you have overt and covert prestige attached to certain codes. So covert prestige is attached to Jamaican Creoles or males. We know that, right? But the sociolinguistic universal, and I want you guys to tell me, the sociolinguistic universal, which says that women tend to use the standard variety more than men in a given society. I want to know if that is true. You think that's true for Jamaica? So do women use the standard variety more than men? And of course, in our context, when we say the standard variety, we're talking about English. Yes, go ahead. You think that Jamaican women use the standard variety more than Jamaican men? So let me ask Natisha, can you let us know your opinion on that, please?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
do.
Oh, all right.
Actually, I think that the women use the standard variety more and more than the men, because really I've heard men say, or younger men say, they are not going to talk that way, use the standard English, because some people think that they are sissies when they do so. And I don't know where they got that concept from, but I've heard it so many times. So when they talk their Creole, I don't know if it makes them feel more masculine for some men or what, but I've heard it so often that I always wondered, why do they say that? But women use standard English more.
All right, thank you for that. Right, so that would have been the
If may,
standard that I mentioned when I said that, for the men, covert prestige is attached to Jamaican Creole. Right, yes, next person, and I think Marlon wants to say something as well.
can go, Madam.
Yes, I tend to think that true, it's a societal thing, it's a culture thing. To speak the language, to command the language, it's more of a girl thing, a female thing. You know, girls, and it's just become commonplace. Excuse me. For example, in at the in the home socially, you know, you socialize girls to be more proper and command the language and to enunciate and represent themselves well where the language is concerned. However, for boys, it's okay. They socialize them that way too. Just use the Creole and the dialect, the Jamaican Creole, and as it fits, that is more of a boy or male personality. You know, they're seen as if a boy should command the language, he's seen as soft and girlish, and he should really not be doing that, they say.
Right, so you're saying that based on our culture and our socialization, you think that the females will tend to use the standard one. All right, thank you. Anard, you were saying?
Um, I wanted to suggest something else in terms of females speaking standard English. I want to believe that, you know, this notion of females speaking standard English and males, you know, tend to use the Creole I believe that it has, it is slowly eroding because initially, maybe in the 90s, when they give me a second, let me check my dogs are barking.
Okay. Anyone else while we wait on Amara to come back?
Yes, miss, I'm back, miss. I'm back.
Okay,
Right. So I am saying that this notion that females tend to speak standard Jamaican English, I think it is a thing of the past. The world is evolving, and I believe it is my opinion that the the the, the females and the culture it is leaning towards education in terms of it's an educated word, especially in Jamaica. So you will find that men are trying to utilize the standard Jamaican English, so that they can be up to par with the females. But although I believe that the I want to say that there are more females graduating from the university, but I still think that more more males there. I think it's that notion it has been eroded, and men they are taking the roles, and they are being up to par with the females in terms of speaking the standard language. It might not be prevalent, but I believe well, maybe, but I believe that there may not there it is not a prevalent issue, but I believe there are men out there who really tries to be on par with the females.
interesting twist. Anyone else? Let me ask Sasha Kane. So I'm calling on persons that I have not heard since we started. So Sasha Kane, do you want to contribute to this discussion?
In terms of how gender influences our language.
Particularly the notion that women tend to use the standard variety more than men. Do you think that is true for Jamaica?
Yes, I do agree. I also agree with Anard that it's kind of that practice is kind of dying out now, where you realize that the males are getting more comfortable speaking.
The male, you said that they're more comfortable speaking English.
Right. But I guess it's because of how persons were culturalized growing up. It wasn't normal for the males to be speaking spoke to them for want of a mistake, right? So they were normally told, speak the past one, rough up yourself and all of that. But no, you realize that aspect of our culture is kind of dying out now, where males more and more now are really getting more comfortable with the more standard
Right. And something that you said triggered a memory that I have of a particular study that looks at powerful women and women in politics. And what that study found, and I actually find it to be true for Jamaica as well, is that when women enter politics, their speech actually, when I say speech, in terms of the features, the phonology, the syntax, etc., their speech actually mirrors that of their male counterparts within that particular field, right? So if you listen to Portia Simpson Miller, for instance, you're not hearing that prim and proper ladylike kind of speech, right, in terms of the standard variety. Likewise, the speech of Lisa Hannah. So while she uses English, yes, the base, the phonology, right, the base of her voice is much deeper, and you can test it. So she appeared on a television show for teenagers called Rapping, and of course we know her as Miss World, I think 1990. So you can look for those clips and listen to her, the quality of her voice, and you would
Yes,
see,
I remember rapping.
oh yes, Rapping, and I think Yvonne Chin was also on that.
Yeah, she was the host at one point. I believe Simone Clark used to host it at one point too.
Yes, that I think that program gave birth to a lot of our journalists today. Yes, because I think Dr. Livingston was also on it, and he is now the director of Karamak. Right. So I want you to, look back at those clips if they have them on YouTube. I'm not sure. Certainly you can hear her voice as Miss World, right, and compare it with how she sounds today. There's a great difference. Another one is what's her name now? Action Ann, right? So
What's her name, please?
Action Ann, she's called Anna Rivas from Portland.
Okay.
Yes. So if you listen to her as well during the campaign for the elections, right? She said something to the effect of my Portland family, but it never sounded like, Miss Prim and Papa, my Portland family, as you would expect her to sound. She was like, my Portland family. And, persons were even teasing her. But again, that's a feature of this notion that when women become more powerful, the speech changes. Likewise, and that is politics, but likewise our, dancehall, what could I say, divas and women in other areas, they're using less of the standard variety. And that is because they are subconsciously, I wouldn't say that they're consciously doing it. Subconsciously, they're changing their speech in terms of the quality of the voice, the phonology, even the language. Sometimes it's just pure Creole, right? Because to be on top in a male-dominated field, obviously there are things that they would need to adjust, and language is one of them. So for Jamaica, I believe that while that was a thing of the past, where the women tend to use the standard variety more, I believe that we're seeing a shift in that as women are becoming more powerful in their respective fields. Right? I don't know if you will agree with me, but that's what I'm observing. All right, and you can observe it a little bit more. There is just this, especially with the phonology, there's just this base in the voices of female leaders in Jamaica. All right. So that is it for gender. And of course, Natisha, you spoke about the stereotype of the men using English. And you're basically saying that, well, you think that men are being bold now, they're using English and they're expressing themselves in English. So we can think about men like Floyd Green and Terry Long and all these other younger politicians, right? We're hearing them coming forth and actually using English. However, I think for the most part, they especially the men in politics, they're still using Jamaican Creole, right? As it relates to ethnicity, we have seen where your place of origin can affect your speech. So if you think about let's say those who are of Indian descent, right? So those in Jamaica, those in Guyana, those in Trinidad, wherever, there is a distinct sound. I don't know if any of you are of Indian descent or you would have noticed it. You can let me know. And it's particularly in the, again, the phonology, the accent. Oh, there's something in the chat. Oh, I'm not sure what you are agreeing with there, Anwar. But tell me about the Indians. Did you guys notice it? Or you haven't been really paying attention? Which one? Yes, Miss, what you mean by yes, Karen? You guys know that I prefer when you use of the microphone.
Yes, Miss, there is a, I don't want, I'm not sure if it's accent, I should call it, but when the ones of Indian heritage, when they speak, they have their tone is different and it seems like an accent coming out. The pronunciation is different from how we speak as normal Jamaicans.
Be careful, you know, it's a normal.
Oh, sorry. It sounds different. It sounds different from how most persons that I know or I hear speaking. They have I don't know how to quite describe it, but they have a way of pronouncing their words that are it just seems different to me. But I have noticed it, and I have family who are of Indian descent, meaning from my husband's side, and they really speak differently. Sometimes there are times when I pretend I understand what they're saying, but it's after replaying it in my mind that I, get the real meaning of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you for that. Okay, Annoyed. Right, and it's not just those in Jamaica, but those in Guyana, those in Trinidad, and I'm thinking about particular linguists, right, who are of Indian descent from from Trinidad and Guyana, and they just have this phonology that is the same in terms of even the speech rate, right? Even the rate of the speech is similar, even though they're from different islands. So that would be an example of variation according to ethnicity. And then of course social background, right? So where you're from, how you grew up, the way of life, that can affect your speech, regional origin, can affect his speech as we know, level of education, and of course their occupation. So lawyers, for instance, they're expected to speak a particular way, right? There's an expectation that they they should be very expressive and that they should have the ability to play with words. And that was actually the field that I wanted to go in. Still hope to one day, right? But I managed to do my forensic linguistics, so that kind of merges linguistics and the law. However, I remember mentoring a law student, and based on her speech, I was saying, you can't talk like that, because if you go to court, nobody never take you seriously. You need to be sounding like your colleagues, your soon-to-be colleagues. And a big part of being a lawyer is your ability to perform in court. And that performance, quote unquote performance, requires the use of language in an effective way, right? So your linguistic competence and your communicative competence have to turn up, as we say in Jamaica, right? And I remember just, commenting on things that she would say to me and just trying to get her to change, that kind of speech to match with the occupation that she was studying for. And then when she started to do her internship, she sent me a message that she sent to her boss, who was a lawyer. And then she sent me the message that he sent her in response. And oh my Lord, she should have really listened to me, because he really slammed her in relation to her level of communication, right? To her communicative competence. So the expectation is that your occupation will influence your speech. So we're hoping that as she continues in the field, that there will be some influence there, right? Because it is basically synonymous with that particular field, that you have to be exhibiting linguistic competence and communicative competence. And I remember in the West Kingston Commission of Inquiry, I remember the lawyer, I don't remember his last name right now. Yes, Michael Williams, I believe his name was. And he, I guess he was fresh out of law school, but he was actually being mocked by the other lawyers, right? And basically they were correcting him on the questions, how he was phrasing the questions and so on. And so we saw that in order to be an effective lawyer in this particular case, you have to have linguistic competence and communicative competence to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, or else you will be ridiculed within that field. So in some cases, your occupation dictates that you speak in a particular way, right? Likewise, the scammers, or they call them now the chopper, right? And usually there is a bit of twanging, as we say, there's this pseudo-American accent that they use when interacting with their victims on the phone. You guys pick it up, right? And it is said, allegedly, it is said that a lot of them, they get their training from the call centers. It is said, right? So for instance, they go through the recruitment process, and then having acquired the skills and so on, then they go on to do their scamming activities, right? So these things will affect your occupation or whatever you claim to be an occupation, right? It does have an impact on your speech. And sometimes for instance, eyewitness reports on TVJ, CBN, etc. Let's say you have an individual giving an account of an accident or something that happened, and that person has a pseudo-American accent. You usually see on social media people commenting on the post to say this one sounds like a scammer, right? Based on their speech. And that's not to be mistaken with the deportee, who might also have an accent, right? So these are areas in language use that we need to study again. So if you are interested in pursuing further studies, that's another idea. I'm giving you guys lots of research ideas. All right, so moving from speaker variable to group variables. So the group variables now, the prestige that is attached, the stigma, and the level of correctness. So it says these are factors that are external to the speaker. Right? So this first set, remember these are the speaker variables. These have to do with the individual. But then we move on now to look at group variables and focus on the external factors. So these are outside of the speaker. The speaker has no control of things, right? So the prestige that is attached to language varieties, and we spoke a bit about that on Sunday. The stigma that's attached, and the levels of correctness, right? So prestige is something that is external to a language, all right? Prestige is not automatically ascribed to any variety. There is no linguistic structure that we can say is more prestigious than another. So this is purely a social factor, right? People who determine the value of the language variety, right? So remember I spoke about covert prestige, covert and overt prestige. So with overt prestige, everyone in the society agrees that that variety is more prestigious than another. However, with covert prestige, it's just unique to a particular group. So for instance, I said that covert prestige is attached to Jamaican Creole among men, right? So that's a subgroup within society. And then stigma, it's the same thing. We stigmatize the varieties based on the values attached, and then the levels of correctness in terms of appropriateness of a language being used in a particular context. All right, so those are the group variables external to the speaker. So primary assignment is based on social class membership, sex, age, etc. And the secondary is based on things such as the church membership, community involvement, leisure time activities, and so on. So of course, we have to talk about social class, because this is the major grouping, right? And even though it's the major grouping, sociologists don't particularly agree on, a complete definition of a social class, because what exactly are we using to determine social class? Are we using your place of residence? Are we using the level of education? Are we using your occupation? Are we using your parents' occupation? So how do we determine social class, right? So you have some studies that you will see in social linguistics and the sociology of language where they have various categories in terms of social class. And the question is how is it that they determine these categories of, for instance, upper working class, lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class, right? How do you really put people into these groups? So what's the difference between the upper working class and the upper middle class? What's the difference between the lower middle class and the middle class, for instance? So the question says, do the members agree that they are in the same class that we place them? So what are your thoughts? Do you think the members agree that they're in the same social class that we place them?
Miss Sam, I am not quite understanding what you mean. Members agree that they're in the class we placed them.
Right. So if we categorize individuals,
yes, miss,
as being members of one social class, is there necessarily an agreement of these members that they're in the same social class? And do we have agreement in order for that classification to be considered correct? So do they have
Mr. Members, well, I think the members agree.
Okay, so you think that they agree. So when people, for instance, we say, okay, you guys are in the working class, you think that all members agree that they are actually, within that classification?
Yes, miss, that's what I think.
Right, let me hear from the others. I'm not seeing Janice and Sabita. Who else is missing? Makini, what do you think? Do you think the members have to agree that they're in the same social class?
Yes, I do think they have to agree that they're in the same social class, because if there isn't consensus, then there is going to be some level of conflict, right? So there are going to be members who think they should be in the social class, and there are going to be members who think that they shouldn't be in the social class. So it has to be a consensus on a level that, yeah, everybody here belongs here.
Right, very good. Now, we had a very popular conflict that I will touch on in a few. But question, and when I ask this question, then you probably will know what I'm talking about. So if individuals live in the same community, do you think that we can use residents to classify them, to rank them as being
No,
social class?
No, miss.
no,
miss.
because if you're talking about the conflict that I think you're talking about, then no. Because Sean Paul's wife told you saying that he needs to go back to where he comes from.
Yes.
So if you're going to use community, different people live in different communities, different people from all walks of life living a
Yes.
community. Some people are going to say, okay, you came from there, so you don't belong here. So if you step out of line well, if you step out of their perceived boundaries or their perceived class rules, the maga tell us if you go bush by you come from, because you don't come from here.
Right. So we can't say everybody who live on Beverly Hills in the upper class, that's what they're saying.
Well, Beverly Hills, is known as as an upper class area. So, it is, if you're from Beverly Hills, then it is deemed that you're from the upper class.
Forgiven, eh?
Yes, it's a given, Mr. Smith. But I think though that in terms of those communities that are, let me use, that are unlabeled. So for example, the rural communities, so the mixed communities, you can get a mixture of the classes. That's what I think.
Miss Dr. Walters.
Yes, go ahead.
So well, this is my take on it, right? My few cents. Do the members agree that they're in the class we place them in? I don't think they agree per se, but I think because of stratification, social stratification, they're in a class, right? If you're gonna say that they agree to be in a class, it's as if like someone's saying, okay, because I'm rural, I just think that I'm a part of the lower class, so I'm gonna speak a particular way, or social as a particular way. So from that perspective, based on the fact that you have social stratification, and with social stratification comes what you call subjectivity, comes what you call bias and stereotype and prejudice. I don't think that they agree, but definitely sometimes they are, well, I would say involuntarily or compulsory placed in a particular class because of, say, stratification.
Right. No. So exactly. So what are we going to use to classify the people? Is it the money? Is it the area of residence? Is it the type of behavior? Because certainly with these situations, with these examples, we're seeing that it's really about the behavior of the individuals that cause the conflict, right? So I remember one of my lecturers, not at uni, right? She was complaining about her neighbor and the bag of knives and just disrupt the neighborhood, and based on her speech, she realized that she just never felt like the neighbor belonged there. Guess who was the neighbor? Anybody want to guess who the neighbor was?
You saying?
No, nobody talk. What do you say to this? Bounty Killer. Right, so it was Bounty Killer who was the neighbor, and every day, the teacher would come and complain about the noise and the behavior and so on. So,
But miss, you can't wrong her. You can imagine you live beside Bounty Killer. Bounty Killer? For what reason? You know him have one bag of man over there so and who in a producer who a play drum, run a back and dance a kid. No, not me.
you're saying that, yes, go ahead, I'm here. Go ahead, Marlon.
I was just going to repeat the phrase that he usually says. I are the one.
Oh, right. So, these individuals, we call them the nouveau riche, right? Nouveau riche. And it's a French term for those who would have acquired wealth, right? Newly acquired wealth. And so, acquiring the wealth doesn't necessarily mean that you have acquired the behavior or the expectation of those
Yes, that's true.
within your what you would say.
Yes, because and that is exemplified through many of our dancehall artists who through their what do you call it now lyrical prowess, they have acquired the wealth that can take them to places where they will be associated with a certain class. But the distinction is made as it relates to how they speak, how they dress, and their overall deportment.
Right.
It doesn't commensurate with what is known with that particular class.
Doctor, this is my thing. It's quite interesting that so much focus is given, especially on how a person should behave if a person is so-called in a particular class. If that's an observed perspective, then where is that actual what you call leeway then for individuality? If because I've acquired wealth and I'm now living in a particular era and I'm now seen as maybe a rich person, whether I want to be an upstart, etc., right? Based on how they call them, does it mean that I have to then actually assume a particular behavior to be seen as like the rite of passage to be there? Or is it a case wherein I can still be myself by just, display my individuality? So, I'm listening, but I'm just trying to think that, whether it's particular or not, whether because of music he got rich wherever he's living, what if that's just his individuality? Should there be like a stereotype or a discrimination, or should there be, this thing where you're saying, you know what, you just don't belong here because you don't act that way? That's just my little bit of concern.
Right. So it's not a matter of, should it, all right, we're not discussing if it is correct for the other members to do that. What we're discussing is the fact that they do it, right? So they might feel entitled to do so because they're saying that we have our quiet neighborhood and we have been here unexposed to the so-called elements, and we want to preserve that level of security and sanctity and tranquility of our neighborhood. And so they can, make the claim that they have this feeling of entitlement, right, to preserve their community in that particular way. So we're not saying that it's correct or not, but we know that we live in a society where class, right, more than race, will determine the inclusion of others, right? So we live in a very classist society. So for instance, driving a vehicle in the United States, it's really not a mark of class. Because if you live in New York, if you've ever visited or, you have relatives there, you'll know that most of them don't drive. They take the subway and they work in corporate, they're managers, of big companies, but they take the train because it's just easier, right? It's easier and it's quicker. So we use assets to determine social class. So for instance, we use vehicles, whether you're driving or you're not driving, and then we look at the type of vehicle to stratify people as well, right? So we know that in our speech community within Jamaica, we're using these things to put people in different categories. So we have to think about how we do things in terms of the education, occupation, and area of residence. So all of them, right? And the expectation is that you have to satisfy these criteria for you to be considered a part of a particular social class. Yes.
Dr. Walters, adding to what Calvin was saying, he was basically saying that he doesn't know if people, like, for instance, agree to necessarily be in a class. But just to give an example, when I was in high school, well, I went to Ulmers. So the thing is with going to a school like that is that you get students from all over the place. You get students from country, students from down the road, Alman Town, people that live in Ligani, people that live in Belvedere Heights, wherever, right? But what happens, or you notice happening, is that they click together. And remember that we're children at this point in time, we're 13, 14, whatever age. So we don't necessarily know why we're clicking. There's no rule as to why we're clicking together. We just know that, all right, these set of children are the Belvedere Heights kids. So they identify with each other. Their speech patterns are similar. Where they come from is similar. Where they go to enjoy themselves is similar. And that's how we click ourselves together. So I don't, and in order to kind of click yourself together, especially in an all-girls school, you have to agree. It's an all-girls school. It's not like a boys' school where, for the most part, boys don't really care. Them just whoever they want, be with them, deal with. Girls are very cliquey, so they have to agree with each other in order to stay in that clique, right? So the thing is that with social classes, it's not a written down thing where, okay, number one, you have to fulfill all of these rules and requirements. Yeah, that's there, but it's not spoken, if that makes sense. It's not a overt thing, it's more covert.
So it's kind of like an unwritten rule.
Yeah.
Yes. So we see that it's not so clear cut when we talk about social class, right? Because even these categories that we have here, the upper working class, lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class, we wouldn't necessarily have these categorizations. So it's going to be very important that when you're reading the various studies, that you will look at how the researcher classifies these individuals into these various groups. So remember in my discussion about the Laval New York study, remember I said that he determined social class based on where the individuals were shopping. So whether they were going to Saks or they were going to Macy's, etc. Right? I think it's S. Kleins, right? S. Kleins is the name of the store in the study. So S. Kleins, Macy's, and Saks. Now, an individual could let's say, be a member of the so-called lower class, and they managed to save up some money, and they decided that they're going to treat themselves, and they go to Saks, right? And they do their shopping there, and they just have to do the study. So with these studies, it's not foolproof. There is usually some kind of explanation that is offered, and you just have to ensure that you know what that explanation is. Because in the studies that you will look at, you will see different classifications. So some will say upper, some would say lower, middle, and upper class, right? Whereas, as you see here, some have upper working class, lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class, etc. So it's going to vary according to the researcher and according to the sociolinguistic situation. Okay? Right? So problems determining class, as we discussed, classifying someone based on statistics, and problems with the designations used, for example, the MMC, the middle class, and so on. And we said already that they are not applicable to all in society. How do we determine the social class of children? Is it by the parents?
Well, doctor, it's normally by the parents. It's normally by the parents. It's normally by the parents. And then the thing about it is that when you do that for children, then sometimes it's like a caste system. If you know about the caste system in India, it's like a caste system for them. And some of them will just get complacent within that parameter to say that, okay, this is where I am at. And it's just fate. On the other hand, too, it can be a case wherein some children actually, even though they are placed there as children, later on they actually supersede the expectation or the limits of their class. And then with that said, no, doctor, I think that there will be a fluidity if we really try to say, okay, we're going to determine the class of children, really, right, in its entirety. Because so what are you going to do? Are you going to change it when they do get to adolescent, when they do get to teenagers, young adults, etc.? So I just think that basically what we do, just guess, like, so your parents, they have this class, then you assign that to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are from that class per se, because they might even speak differently.
Right, because let's say you have somebody saying miss.
Yes, Dr. Walters, it's honored. Miss, I don't know if you can correct me, but I know friends who, well, I went to the culture for part of my high school, and then I transferred to Black River High. But I have friends who their parents they are from a specific social status, so they're what we would call rich. But when you look at how the child turns out to be in terms of his educational attainment and these ascribed achievements, him no make it in a life, but yet people still consider the child or the young man rich. They're doing that, I guess, based on the fact that they would have known that the parent or the family, they are rich. So I could be wrong, Dr. Walters, but I'm suggesting that once your parents are said to be that, in most cases, people will, even if you supersede the expectations, people will still attach. Say, boy, Anad. I always remember Anad. Anad at school, poor. All if you rich. But I think the origin, it 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 stays with you for the most part. That's my thing. I don't know if I'm wrong, miss. You can correct me, Dr. Waters.
All right. So that would have been your experience based on what you said, with being at Black River and I don't know the other school that you mentioned. But what about, let us think about children who, for instance, they are from humble beginnings, let's say they pass the PEP for Campion or what's the other one, Immaculate or Ardet, right? Would we still consider them to be members of the social class of their parents?
Miss Doctor, I was going to say that it's not just the parents that some people may look at to say, I am going to put the children in this class. So there are other factors, like for example, the way the child speaks, his or her mannerism. There are different factors that persons may look at and say, okay, you belong to this class or you don't belong to this class, other than just by, okay, because your parents belong to this class. Because what if you're in a scenario in our case where you don't know the child's parents, how are you going to, you're not going to put them in a class based on their parents because you don't know them, but you may look for other factors now to say, okay, this child seems as if he or she belongs to such and such class.
Right, and I'm glad that you mentioned speech because we tend to use speech as an indicator of social class. Not so much no, right? It still happens, but definitely in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had the situation where people determine the speech of the class of an individual based on their speech, whether they're speaking English or Jamaican. Of course, they're speaking English, they're considered to be of the upper class. And if they're speaking Jamaican, they're considered to be of the lower class, which means that they're poor, they don't have the education, etc., etc. But now what we're seeing is that speech is not so much an indicator of wealth. And in the language attitude survey that was conducted in 2005, this question was posed to the 1,000 informers who participated in the survey, and the results showed that they really didn't believe that language was an indicator of wealth anymore, right? And that was in 2005. Because of course, as I mentioned, the Negro rich, right? There are alternative ways of getting rich, and knowledge of English is not required for that in Jamaica anymore. All right. So with these questions, they're very thought-provoking, and we have to look at the merits of the situations. So for instance, if we're analyzing students at a particular school, let's say in terms of speech and the mannerisms, then we would have to make a decision as to how we will determine their social class. So for some researchers, they will say, once you're going to Campion, once you're going to Immaculate, once you're going to Arden, etc., you are of the upper class. Whereas others, they will determine class within the school population, as you were saying, right? They will determine within the school population. So it's not so much that, okay, you're going to Woolman's, that means that you're rich, but they would actually go in and look at the different groupings and then make that determination, right? So again, it's really up to the researcher and it's up to you, right, to also ensure that you identify the criteria that the researcher is using in their particular study. So as you begin to read the sociolinguistic studies, you will see for yourselves that they're using different criteria to determine class. All right, so it's just a matter of identifying what those are. All right, any questions?
No, miss.
No question, miss. It's just that I think, well, especially even let's focus on Jamaica and the Caribbean. I think that we are still actually adhering to colonial factors when it comes down to language. And for that reason, even though you have persons who are sincere in actually campaigning for Creoles to be viewed as prestige languages, which they are, that won't happen anytime soon because of how structured we are as a society. And even though we try to downplay the fact that we're still colonized based on the fact that we have what we call an independent state or independence, the fact is that, you know, colonialism, you know, is still marring the mere existence of African people and of Caribbean people, so much so that even with language, we're so specific and detailed in actually trying to create segregation among each other.
Right. So once we look at linguistic discrimination and language rights and so on, we will definitely get a deeper appreciation of what's happening there in relation to language and power. All right. But I definitely agree with you on that. Any other comments? That's it. All right, so we meet again the week after next. Guys, please ensure that you check your schedule. I think by now you get the hang of it, right? Ensure that you check in your schedule and that you are working towards your assignment. As I said before, we're gonna ensure that you guys get into the Google group. So we might be able to transfer the material, but it's a whole heap of stuff, lots of articles. So I just want to get you guys in the group from now, all right? You can always make the transition later on in the semester. Okay, so please ensure that if you're having any challenges, that you send me an email. In the past, I've given quite a few extensions because students wait until the last minute to say that, I'm having some difficulty with the paper. And so please don't wait for that time. Ensure that you send me a WhatsApp message or an email if you're having some challenges so that we can go through. All right, and guys, please send me the area that you're looking at. So whether you're looking at, something in West Africa or Hawaii or China, I want you guys to send the information. All right. Okay, guys, so you are dismissed.
All right, good night, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, take
Night,
care.
everyone.
Night.
Good night, Miss.
Good night, Karen. Good night, Atisha.